Tony here again with a little bit of a revelation from a book that I'm reading about God of all things. Well, it's called The Anatomy of God. And as you know, the Bible and most books that talk about God usually use a certain amount of metaphor and symbolism and stuff like that. Well, have you ever wondered if God had a physical sexuality? I mean, did this very real God have sex organs? And if human beings, man, Adam, if you like, was created in the image of this God, shouldn't they have been created circumcised? Interesting stuff to answer, but just a sec, I've had a text come through, okay? Well, look on my Facebook and I'll put a link on to that particular book that I'm reading at the moment called The Anatomy of God. But suffice to say, in this little preface to The Little House is Built, it is extremely interesting that Wendy is apparently shot in the breast with an arrow. These are boys who have lost their mothers, and apparently another boy or a youth, Peter Pan, is bringing them a mother in Wendy, or the Wendy who they shoot. The arrow and the bow in classic mythology have always been regarded as phallic symbols. When the bow is pulled back and taut, as you can imagine, the arrow extends. And when the bow is released, the arrow spurts forth with force and penetrates. I'm sure you can understand why the bow and the arrow have been regarded as phallic symbols. Now, that might make you read about the God in the Bible in some rather different ways. Might make you understand a little bit more about patriarchy and how this idea that life was carried in the male semen. Yep. And, therefore, everything that came to life and was alive with God's life, was male, was created male. It might even help you understand just a little bit about why some crazy Christians are getting all that wound up about women priests and people who might have changed their genitals. All very patriarchal, isn't it? Also, a lot going on in here. Now, back to this innocent little story, okay? I'm going to pause again, just regather myself, and we'll start, okay? When the 5 other boys came back with their bow and arrows, they found Wendy laying on the ground, and Tootles feeling ever so pleased with himself. He cried, "You are too late. I have shot the Wendy." They did not hear Tinker Bell saying, "Silly ass." She flew away to hide. Tootles had done exactly what she wanted, and he would get all the blame. The boys crowded round Wendy, and Slightly was, as usual, the first to speak. He said in a frightened voice, "But this is not a bird. I think it's a lady." Tootles began to tremble. "Could it be a lady?" "They have killed her," said Nibs. "I can see what it is," said Curly. "Peter was bringing us a lady." "Yes, a lady who would take care of us," said the twins. "And now Tootles has shot her." Tootles was very pale. He said he'd never seen a lady except in dreams. And then he called her pretty mother. I think that's so beautiful. But when a real lady came, he went on, sadly, I shot her. I shot my own mother. Boy, this is getting extremely Freudian. They were all thinking the same thought. Oh, won't Peter be angry? And Tootles said he should go away. He was so afraid of Peter. But now they heard Peter crowing loudly overhead, and the next moment he dropped down beside them. They were all, except Tootles, standing close round the body of Wendy, hoping Peter would not see it. I'm back again, said Peter. Why don't you cheer? They tried to cheer, but no sound came out of their mouths. I've bought you a mother at last, said Peter joyfully. He expected them to say, how clever you are, but they didn't. Peter became rather anxious. He said, she flew this way. Haven't you seen her? Peter, said Tootles, I will show her to you. Get back, twins, let Peter see. Peter looked at Wendy, lying there with the arrow still sticking in her. He did not know what to say or do. After some time he remarked that Wendy was dead. Perhaps she's frightened at being dead, he went on. He thought of making a joke out of it and hopping off on one leg. I told you Peter was quite heartless. But somebody ought to be punished. So he took the arrow out of Wendy's breast and asked whose it was. Tootles bravely answered it was his. Peter was then going to stab him with it, and Tootles, kneeling, waiting to be killed, he was sure he deserved it. But somehow Peter could not make up his mind to kill Tootles. And while the rest were watching him in wonder, Nibs was watching Wendy. He cried, the Wendy lady moved her arms. I heard her say, poor Tootles. Peter said, then she is alive. The Wendy lady is alive, shouted Slightly. Peter knelt by her and found the button he had given her, which she had put upon the chain around her neck and saved her life. The arrow had struck against it. Wendy was not dead. She was only fainting. Do get better quickly, Wendy, said Peter. I want to show you to the mermaids. But of course she could not answer. What was that curious noise overhead? I think I've been there before. Listen to Tink, said Curly. She's crying because she wanted the Wendy to be killed. Peter did not know what this meant, but when they told him how Tink had screamed at them to shoot the Wendy, he was shocked and said, Tink, I won't be your friend any more. Go away forever. Tink begged and prayed, but Peter would not listen until he saw Wendy move her arm, and then he said, well, go away for a whole week anyhow. And Tink flew away, as cross as two sticks. I didn't know sticks could be cross. Peter and the boys were wondering what to do with the fainting Wendy. Curly said, let us carry her down into our house, and Slightly agreed that this was the proper way to behave to ladies. Oh, no, said Peter, it would not be respectful to touch her. Ooh. Just as I was thinking, said Slightly. But she will die if we leave her here, said Tootles. Yes, she will, said Slightly. But there's nothing else to be done. Oh, but there is, cried Peter. We'll build a little house all around her. Wasn't this a clever plan? Peter made the boys fetch branches and moss and furniture from the house underground as fast as they could go, and when they were all scurrying all over the place, almost tumbling over each other, they were so eager to please Peter, two sleepy persons crawling in among them. These were John and Michael, who kept going to sleep and waking up just enough to take another step, then going to sleep again. I know people like that. Peter had quite forgotten them, but when they said, hello, Peter, he began to remember. They asked, is Wendy asleep? Peter was busy measuring Wendy so as to leave some room beside her for a table and chairs. He said yes without thinking. I often do that. "Let's waken her to make us some supper," said Michael. Oh boy, this kid's idea of women is amazing. But Peter commanded them to help build Wendy's house. He told Curly to see that they did. John and Michael were so surprised at the idea of building a house for Wendy that Michael forgot to say "won't," and John forgot to be sleepy. They were at once made to work like anything. "First we must put up the table and the fender," said Peter. "Then we shall build the house around them." "Yes, I remember," said Slightly. "That is the way a house is built." "Slightly go and fetch a doctor," said Peter. "Aye, aye, sir," said Slightly. He went away and returned with John's top hat on. He made believe to be a doctor, and as Peter did not know the difference between real and make-believe, this did very well. Peter called him sir, and Slightly pretended to put a glass thing in Wendy's mouth. When he took it out again, he told Peter he had cured her. Next, he ordered that she was to be given beef tea or a cup with a spout in it, or a cup with a spout to it. And then they took back the hat, which was quite real to John, from whom he had borrowed it without asking. The odd thing was that Wendy really was getting better. She began to move a little through her eye, though her eyes were still shut, and by her mouth opened. "Perhaps she's going to sing in her sleep," said Peter. "Wendy, will you sing what sort of house you would like?" Wendy then sang a little verse, still with her eyes shut. "I wish I had a pretty house, the littlest ever seen, with funny little red walls and roof of mossy green." And there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I will stop on page 17, knowing that the little house is built, and you've got a little bit more insight into God, bows and arrows, Bibles, and Holy Scriptures. Bye.